Okay, so I just beat the Callisto Protocol, and I'm gonna do a rundown of what I think. So I'm a big Dead Space fan. Love the first, second, and even the third game. And yeah, so I played through Callisto Protocol on PC. And so let's start it off like this. Overall, it is a good game, I think. I think it is a good game with good atmosphere, right? The gameplay, fun. Good, fresh gameplay. But some of the parts of the gameplay, the new additions they made, I don't know if they just don't know how to do it properly. They should have looked to something like Last of Us, or even, it's going to be weird to say, but Dark Souls, Elden Ring. But yeah, there was a heavy emphasis on like melee combat and dodging. And I love that. That's great. However, they fucked it up a little bit and made it really infuriating by there being no dedicated block button and no dedicated lock on button. Therefore, if you get into a fight with like 3 of the enemies, you'll be locked on one, and then another one will come in and slap you, and because the health is so low, I mean, it's either gonna kill you instantly, or it is gonna put you in a very bad state where you still have 3 enemies to kill. So I don't know. I love the dodging. I love the melee, but they really should have had a dedicated lock-on button, dodge button, and block button. That would have made it so much more crisp, so much more controllable. Because a lot of the time I felt like when those situations happened where someone hit me while I was locked onto someone else, forcibly, and someone just come in and smack me in the back of the head, it was so infuriating because it wasn't my fault. It didn't feel like it was my fault. Of course, it was my fault for not blocking an attack coming from someone that was attacking me, that I could see in front of me, locked on. But if it was someone else on the side that just comes in and is like, hey, bitch, and slaps me in the back of my fucking head, in the back of my neck, I mean, it's annoying, and it doesn't feel like it's my fault. So, yeah, add in a lock button, a dodge button, and a block button. You know, I didn't use much blocking, but still. The enemy designs, pretty good for the most part. I think the vast majority of the enemies are interesting with the, well, I don't want to give them away, but most of the enemies are very interesting. The basic default enemies, though, are not. They just look like bald people with veins in their face. They're not very interesting. But, you know, if you look at that and you're like, oh, you know, I want something cooler, I want something scarier, it's a horror game, just wait, because you'll get enemies that look very terrifying. I would say probably there are more enemies that are terrifying in this game than Dead Space. You know, the basic xenomorph looks horrifying, but there's not much variation and many different types, depending on which Dead Space you're playing. But, you know, in general, across all Dead Spaces, I think Callisto Protocol has more variation and more horror designs for the enemies. So if you're looking for that, then you're set. As far as the story goes, it's really basic, and it not even just basic, but it's almost kind of ripping off of Dead Space, like Dead Space 1 from 3. It's kind of ripping off on it, like T for T for T. Like it's the exact same, especially with like the pacing. If it goes, you'll go into a room, it's like, hey, we gotta get out of this place, and you'll be following behind someone, and then like for some reason the bridge collapses, and you're like, oh shit, now I gotta get out of this place I collapsed into, and oh, there's these people that are really elusive and methodical in their evil ways, and you know, it's shit like that. It's T for T Dead Space. So if you love the Dead Space story, I don't know what's wrong with you, because it wasn't that great, but if it doesn't bother you, then the story in Callisto Protocol isn't going to bother you. But it's not mind-blowing. It's not crazy. It just is there to serve you hours of smashing people's faces in and shooting their legs off. That's what it's there for. It's not supposed to, like, throw you like, whoa. That being said, there is some, like background lore that is very reminiscent of Dead Space. Like, a lot of kanji, a lot of, like, Japanese characters. Kind of like, think of, like, the Ishimura from Dead Space 1. There's a lot of that kind of, like, ships are based around, like, Japanese names and whatnot. So it's very similar in that way. It has a very similar lore. You could definitely fit this into the Dead Space lore itself. You know, like, as far as world building goes. It's cool. I like that. What else we got? Guns. The guns in the game. The weapons. I like the stun baton. That's the first weapon you get. It's the melee weapon that serves... Oh, actually, technically, you get a different melee weapon at the start, but then you get the stun baton. But they basically serve the same purpose, which is just beating people's heads in. The stun baton was cool, but it didn't really feel like a stun baton, because after a certain point, you're cutting enemies' arms off. So it's more like a electric sword or blade, like a plasma cutter, a Tesla cutter. But yeah, I love the melee weapon. It's cool. I don't know why he holds it with two hands, but whatever. That's irrelevant. The guns, aside from the melee weapons, though, pretty boring looking. You know, you had a lot of cool, interesting engineering-based weapons in Dead Space 1. And then in Dead Space 2, you got a couple more military weapons, like the marksman rifle. And then in Dead Space 3, they opened the whole fucking shebang, and you could make whatever you wanted. It was really cool. This game, yeah, the weapons, they have a cool basis behind them, which is that they're all 3D printed, and you have to have schematics to get them. Visually, though, the weapons look pretty boring, I would say, in my opinion, except for the one certain weapon you get towards the very end, which I like, just on bias points, though. Like, it doesn't look that interesting, but I'm biased towards that kind of weapon, so I like it. The upgrade systems on those weapons are cool. I never got to the point... So, when you go to the shop area, you can upgrade your weapons to a certain point. You know, like, oh, I want it to have more stability. I want it to have more damage. Stuff like that. And then, like, towards the top of the rank of the upgrading, you can give it an alternate fire. I never got to that point where I could give a weapon an alternate fire because I just didn't have enough money. I guess I was spreading my money around too thin around all the weapons, but I never had that. But that is a cool idea that you can give those weapons an alternate fire. However, in Dead Space, those weapons had it by default. Gave them an extra utility that wasn't gatekept by a, you know, monetary system, which I was like, okay, I appreciate that you're having me, like, level up these weapons, and, like, I like this weapon a lot, so I want to really put money into it. But the weapons I did like, it seemed like they came really late in the game, minus the melee weapon. And I never got enough money to really get the alt fire and truly unlock the potential of the gun. And there's no NG plus to my currently, you know. So I was like, damn, maybe I missed a bunch of money. I don't know. So yeah. And on top of the guns, while we're speaking about it, there's no, like, in-universe crosshair type targeting system. I love that about Dead Space 1, 2, and 3, where you could, like, aim the gun. It had a beam on their head. It was very immersive. It was very fit within the universe, the world building. In this game, you just have a crosshair. Didn't like that too much, but I'm not going to complain overtly about it, so whatever. Going on to the atmosphere of the game. Dense, creepy, good sound design. Yeah, it's what you'd expect from a horror game, especially one from the team of Dead Space, right? I don't actually know how many people are behind it besides Glenn Schofield, but yeah, it's very similar. You know, it has that dense, creepy atmosphere that really builds it up, makes it tense. The only thing I could complain about the atmosphere is sometimes there would be like horror strings, some motherfucker playing a cello, but then like nothing scary is happening. So like I would have just killed like 3 guys, right? And then like it was like I'm like, okay, that's a very unnecessary amount of horror cello or violin or whatever, dude. You don't need to play this instrument after I killed everybody. It's like building up after I already did what was being built up to. It's like, okay, not necessary. I don't know if that was a glitch or I don't know. Whatever. Speaking of glitches, let's just talk about performance real quick. Well, let's talk about graphics. I'll talk about performance at the end because that's a big thing and whatever. Graphics look pretty good for the most part. I played on high. Despite the performance issues. Yeah, I don't have anything specific to say about the graphics, really. They look good. There were some graphical issues, though, when I played through the game, such as, like, the Steam. I don't know what happened in development. Maybe it was all the crunch time, whatever. But, like, you would see, like, the boxes. Like they didn't fill it out in Unity. They didn't remove the boxes that look like the spray. So you'd have the mist, but then you'd have like big gray boxes shooting out where the mist is coming out. Like I'm not really familiar with the terms, but it is the point where the mist comes out, and there's supposed to be like gray boxes that hit and shit like that. But they didn't remove them, so you could just see the big gray boxes inside of the mist. So there are some graphical issues. I'm sure they'll be addressed for the next month or whatever, but whatever, let's go on and talk about the performance. Okay, here's a big one. I played on PC. Apparently a lot of people didn't have trouble with the performance on console, but the Steam edition specifically is what I'll talk about of Callisto Protocol had a mostly negative review within like 3 hours of launch, something like that, due to the performance. Everybody's saying stutter protocol, the performance sucks, fix your fucking game, shit like that. And yeah, the performance is horrible. I don't have the beefiest PC ever made, but I have a pretty good RTX card in my laptop here. 2070, I think it is. I'm not super sure. It's been a while, but it should definitely be able to handle Callisto Protocol. And yeah, the game is just stuttery, low frames, graphical issues, and it makes the game unplayable from time to time, especially in like a really heavy fight. And then for some reason, I've heard it being thrown around shaders. They didn't compile the shaders, or they did compile it. Something about compiling shaders in Unreal 4, and it fucked up the FPS. And yeah, so it can just out of nowhere start stuttering. Your frames will drop. You'll be like, what the hell happened? You'll be in the middle of a fight, and then all of a sudden it'll like pick back up to like 60 frames. I'm like, okay, this is clearly not my PC, or the frames would never pick up. So there's some kind of weird optimization issues with the game. They gotta fix that. I managed to play through the entire game with pretty bad performance, but it did have a couple points where I was like, fuck this, and I stopped playing the game, just because like I would hit a stutter in the middle of a fight, and then, you know, due to the bad melee, I don't want to say bad, but the janky, incoherent, inconsistent is what I'll say, inconsistent melee combat, I would get fucking hit like 3 times while having like 5 FPS, and it would just, and then I didn't put that down, but I will say, talk about it. Yeah, I'd get hit 3 times, 4 times, and die, and yeah, so performance shitty. They gotta fix it. I think they did fix it a little bit, tiny bit, when I last played for my 4th session of my gameplay of it, but because it was slightly better. But yeah, they gotta fix that. It's horrible. Another thing, I did not put it down on the list of things I want to talk about, but I really have to talk about it because it's fucking one of the... I'm sorry, I smacked my mic. It's one of the worst parts of the game. The checkpoint system is so bad. The checkpoint system. Imagine you go into a fucking area with 10 guys, 15 FPS, and you have to beat them all. Okay, you're gonna die a couple times. Well, go back 15 minutes. Maybe that's a bit excessive. Go back 5, 8, 9 minutes. Go sell your stuff at the vending machine again that you just sold. Go upgrade your weapons again at the vending machine. Pick up items again. The checkpoint system is abysmal. It seems like, I don't know. I don't remember the checkpoint system being that bad in Dead Space. But just with like the lethality of the combat and everything, the checkpoint system really stands out, and it really infuriated me a couple times. Like, I stopped playing on episode 3. It was on episode 3 of my gameplay. I played for like 30 minutes, and the checkpoint system just fucking ruined it. Because I would go, and I was in this one area, and I went to the left, and I got this new schematic for a gun, and I was like, oh, cool. And I got some other items and whatnot, and there was a couple enemies that popped out. I killed them, and then I went to the right side of the fucking building, and it was covered in mist, and I kept getting slapped up because I couldn't see them, and my frames kept dropping. And guess what? Every single time I died, I had to go back to the left of the building to get all the items and then kill those specific enemies. And I had to keep doing that over and over and over again. And it was so irritating. I hated it. The checkpoint system... Sorry, I spent my mic again. The checkpoint system is terrible. It is awful. There were multiple times throughout my playthrough of it where the checkpoint system, I just thought about it. I was like, fuck! You know, I was like so pissed off. I wanted to quit. I wanted to quit the game and try and refund it because I was like, fuck you. And it doesn't even, it's like, okay, it's like it's a combination of like unfair deaths and then a bad checkpoint system. You get killed by some bullshit that doesn't feel like it's your fault, and then you go back 10 minutes in your gameplay because for some reason they added in manual saves. Ooh, but the manual saves don't do anything. You will manually save your game, and then it'll put you back where the last checkpoint was anyways. It's so stupid. Why do they give me... Why do they even have it as an option? It's like, manually save your game. Great, I manually saved it. Oh, fuck you. Suck my dick. You're back 10 minutes anyways. It's like, it was just so terrible and infuriating, and it just... Oh my god, I can't stand a bad checkpoint system. Especially when they do combat as lethal as it is in Callisto Protocol. Like 3 shots will kill you, shit like that. You might get ganged up on by like 8 enemies, which is why they have the dodging and the blocking, because it's like, okay, I can dodge everything, you know, just don't get hit 3 times, shit like that, you know. Yeah, so checkpoint system, fucking garbage. I hope they fix that, if there is a fix for it. Moving on though. The UI. UI is fine. Like I said, I wish they didn't have a crosshair. Whatever though. As far as the inventory, you know, nothing. It's pretty much like Dead Space. It's all in universe. The only thing I could complain about it is that the text is really low resolution for some reason, at least on PC. So it was kind of hard to read what was typed out, you know, over like a gun where it gave you a description of what would be upgraded when you upgrade the gun, or what an item is. It's like, oh, blah, 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 you know, it would be like really low resolution, hard to read. So that's an issue. I think that's probably part of the graphical issues that they'll fix, though. It's not that big of a deal, I guess, right now. So let's move on to horror. It's hard for me to talk about horror in a game, like spooky, scary shit, because I just typically don't get scared that much. There's like, I have 2 fears. But there was only one part of the game that really hit any kind of fear, and it was like the water stuff at one point. That scared me. Jump scares do not scare me. I don't care. Atmosphere can make me be scared, like every time I play like Thief, where it feels like very kind of like open and atmospheric and like things work together. When you start adding in like jump scares that are scripted and stuff like that, that doesn't scare me. If everything's like dynamic and atmospheric and very tense in the atmosphere, that will build up some tenseness and might scare me, like in Thief. But yeah, no, this game didn't really scare me. I've heard people don't think it's very scary either, but I could definitely see how someone would be scared of it, you know, if they're very like shaky kind of person, because there are definitely a lot of jump scares, creepy enemies, dense atmosphere, but for some reason this game didn't really. It felt more like like watching Aliens, like the second one, where it's like it's like a creepy setup, but most of it's like actiony, you know. Yeah, it didn't scare me at all. But it's hard for me to speak to this because I'm not very hard to scare. Sorry, opposite. I am very hard to scare. So yeah, it didn't. Yeah, I don't know. What's scary? But I love horror and I love sci-fi, so put those two together and I'm sold. The only other thing I have to say about the horror aspect of the game is that there were way too many of the same kind of jump scares. Specifically, like the larva. There's an enemy that's like a larva, and they'll hide in like lockers and chests and stuff like that. And it's almost kind of comical how many times they try to do it. Like, you'll open a locker, it's like, oh, item, item, item. Oh, there's a larva on my face. Oh no! Like, and sometimes they do it like 2-3 times in a row. It's like, okay, it wasn't scary the first time. It's funny the second time. It's annoying the third time. Stop having larva jump on my face. It's like, it's not scary. Especially not to me, but it's just not scary. I don't think that to most people. Like if you get caught by it the first time, okay, fair enough. I wasn't, but I'm not easy to scare. You get caught by it the second time, and you get caught by it the third time. I don't think anybody's getting caught by it the second or third time, even with the dense atmosphere of the game. You know, it's like. They just did it too many times. Same thing with another creature. It's like that has to do with an egg sac. I won't give it away, but it jumps and grabs you a couple times. And creepy enemy. I really like it. It's a creepy enemy, but it didn't really ever scare me. And although it definitely could have. There was one point where it was really like dense and slow, and nothing had attacked me for a while. So like the atmosphere really built up, and the tenseness of it. And then one of those motherfuckers is just like there, because you go through a lot of areas with eggs, and this thing comes out of an egg sac. So it's kind of like unexpected. You never know when it's gonna come. Kind of like a jump scare, but it fits within the world and the dynamics of it. But yeah, it definitely could have scared me. So, yeah, that's the horror part of the game. Could have been scarier, I guess, but again, it's really hard for me to speak on horror stuff, because very rarely do I ever get scared by a horror game. I get scared more by Morrowind and Oblivion and Skyrim and Fallout than, like, actual built-to-be scary games. I don't know. Something about those games is just like, it's so much immersiveness, and like it really feels like you're there. And I don't know. Anyways, moving on. Boss fights. There are a couple boss fights in the game. I want to say they're good, but they are also terrible. Most of the bosses will one-shot you if they hit you. One in particular depends on what form he's in, but yeah, most of the big, heavy-hitting boss enemies will one-shot you. which is fine because you can dodge. However, because I guess the developers are like, that's too easy. You can't just dodge everything. They decide to add in enemies on top of the boss that will one-hit you. And then again, going back to the clunky combat with its lock-on system, and you can't turn very effectively to look at something else while you're fighting. It just makes for a mess sometimes. You'll be running from a boss, and then an addition will come in and hit you. It'll hit stun you, and then the other guy will hit you at the same time, and it'll one shot you, and it's just like annoying. Enough of this. Like, just I would rather the game be easier and not annoying than just like infuriating and unfair. Like, I'd rather play an easy game than an unfair one. That's just me, though. And that's coming from someone that loves Dark Souls. So, I don't know, it's, you know. Dark Souls has always felt fair to me. Elden Ring, on the other hand. Anyways, moving on. Again. This will be a small little spoiler section. Won't take more than about 2 minutes or so. So, if you don't want to hear the spoiler of the ending, skip about 2-3 minutes ahead. Yeah, the ending. I want to talk a little bit about the ending here. So at the ending, Jacob, I think is the main character's name, he throws Danny in the escape pod, which, first off, come on now. She's a bitch. I don't know why you would ever do that, but whatever, he does it. And yeah, Danny escapes, but he's left behind to die. However, there's a little tid piece where it's like, oh, we can get out of here, but then the game still ends. Story DLC is definitely going to be about that, I think. It's either going to be about Danny escaping, or it's going to be about Jacob escaping the facility. Either way, it's going to set up for Callisto Protocol 2. So, that was that. So yeah, that's really all I have to say about the game. I'll just go through a little overall thing here. So, overall, the game isn't just a reskin of Dead Space, which I saw a lot of people say, oh, I would have loved it if it was just a Dead Space reskin. And yeah, I would have loved it too, but I was hoping for some freshness. I was hoping for some new gameplay additions, and that it would have the pacing and the atmosphere of Dead Space, but maybe have something, a little something more, you know? And it did. It had the melee combat, which felt great. It was very visceral to, like, dodge an enemy and then, like, go in with that stun baton and cut off his limbs with it. So yeah, I mean, I enjoyed that aspect of it. It added a fresh gameplay option, which is great. The only problem is that I feel like they didn't test it enough and they didn't polish it enough. I don't know who they did or had to do, like, QA testing on it, like, but they didn't do a very good job, in my opinion, because, like, there are some very obvious weaknesses to the system they have, with it being, like, all dedicated to, like, oh, hold back for blocking, hold left for dodging. Like, it just can be a mess when you integrate your movement keys to your combat keys, which I've said it a couple times. Gothic does, but Gothic is also like a slower paced RPG game. So when you have like 3 highly deadly enemies coming at you in Callisto Protocol, it's much different from when you have enemies coming at you in Gothic 2, Gothic 1. So yeah, it just it could be better. And then on top of that, you can still strafe while doing combat moves in Gothic. So yeah, you just it becomes a pain in the ass with their key bindings in the game. So yeah, they should tighten that up for the next game. Now, if it's worth your $60, I would say probably not. I'm a sucker for sci-fi and horror, so it was kind of a must-play for me. I don't buy games a whole lot, though. If you're just looking for, like, a game to buy because you're bored, nah, I would probably say not right now, especially on PC. it was the story was kind of short too. It's probably like 8 hours. For like, think about it, 8-hour game for $60. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it was worth it personally. But that's not to say it's not a great game. It's just like, you know, kind of short and linear. It's not like you're gonna get a whole lot of content out of the game. You're gonna go through the linear story, the linear corridors, have your horror experience, fight your enemies, get infuriated with the combat, and that's it. So I don't know. To me, like, the idea of paying $60 for like a 8-hour linear game, not to me. But you know, if you love sci-fi and you love horror like me, though, it might be worth the $60 because I don't feel disappointed I bought it. Certainly not, because I loved it. Even with all its flaws, I still love the game. So that's it. That's all I got to say about it. Hope you enjoyed, and yeah, peace. Flip, flop, flop, depend on how the cheddar look. She'll buy her own, I don't think she'll never look.